All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the ML podcast. Today, we've got our biggest crew ever, and I think it's for a very exciting topic. So today, we've got 6 people on the call, and we're going to be talking about changing the Workday/Workweek structure, which is something that we wanted to address a couple of weeks ago, and now we're getting the opportunity to do it. I just wanted to introduce everybody that we've got here. So we have Danette Fenton-Menzies, we've got Grahame Gerstenberg, we've got Alan Hunt, we've got John Scollen, and we've got Kanika Chopra. So I just want to say thank you all for being on the call. It is an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Jez.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. So I've got a couple of pre-prepared questions that we'll be throwing around. And I think I wanted to just sort of talk about the history of the Workday structure a little bit, and then we can sort of get into our questions. So I had a quick look, and it was apparently designed back in the 1500s, but it was implemented in England in 1810 by someone called Robert Owen, who suggested that we have an 8-hour workday for 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of sleep was the thinking. So that was the plan. How that's worked out in 2021 is interesting to see, but we'll definitely be tackling that. So I might start with Danette, and we'll just open this up to conversation. What are some things about the current Workday structure that you don't like?
So my body clock starts at about 4 a.m. So the 9 to 5 is like, yeah, that's sort of towards the end of my brain working. So I think, for people with different time body clocks, it's important to sort of value those. I think too, back when it was all invented, it was about control. It was about these people will do these tasks, and the tasks were very much about creating widgets and stuff like that. Whereas now it's much more about the creative side, the innovation side. And our brain, you could work for 10 minutes and come up with a brilliant idea. You could work for 8 hours and be bored out of your brain and actually never come up with a great idea. So I think thinking that the amount of time people work equals what they're going to actually produce, particularly if we're looking for creative solutions, not so much. Great question.
Yeah, no problem. I think that's totally true, and I think we'll get into some other things that had to do with the old structure back and how times have changed. But I might throw this now to Grahame. Do you have any thoughts on some things that you don't think work about the current structure?
Talking about old.
Wow.
That's
one of the things about the current structure that's not working, Jess. Just go back to Danette's comment about, thanks, John, your notice will be in the mail, about 9 to 5 not working for her, and a 4 a.m. start is a much better way and is in tune with her body clock. Not mine, but that's okay. The current structure we have was refined during the Industrial Revolution, and I like Danette's comment about control. I think part of it was also about profitability, because a lot of workers then, a lot of employers are working in some sort of factory. There was a lot of manufacturing, a lot of production going on, and it made sense from a quality control, certainly from a profitability perspective, to break the workday down into clear sections. And then of course shift work became a thing because factory owners worked out that if they had different people coming in, we could actually go 24 hours a day. We just get people doing different shifts. But we have shifted, I think, a long way from there. And there's now more people working in what we call, there are a lot more knowledge workers, I think it's the label that gets used, where we're trading or dealing in information and knowledge a lot more than we are necessarily manufacturing widgets. So one of the things that the pandemic has brought home to all of us is it can be different. It should be different. And technology obviously is the other thing that's had a massive influence on what's possible, because we wouldn't have been having this conversation 3 years ago to the same depth we are today if it wasn't for the fact that the pandemic happened, and then organisations and creative people had to scramble to get tech to the point where we could all operate really well in a hybrid environment. So yeah, fun times.
Yeah, and I think sort of piggybacking off that, Grahame, one of the things that I've definitely noticed, especially with that 8 hours of recreation and 8 hours of sleep, they're usually the two that get sort of substituted with other things to do with work as opposed to the 8 hours of work. I remember when I was traveling into work, which is about 45 minutes each way, that wasn't factored into the 8 hours of work time. That was eaten out of either the sleep or recreation time. So that was always something I didn't really like. I might throw it to Alan, who, first of all, thanks for joining the ML podcast for the first time. Great to have you on. But I want to get your thoughts on some things you don't like about the current structure.
Autonomy is the thing coming up for me, Jez, where when I was on the farm, I'm looking back now, appreciating that I had the autonomy, like Danette says, if I wanted to start early, I could start early, especially in summer, to avoid that heat. And if the children needed me at a certain time, I had the autonomy to do those things that I valued when they suited me, as opposed to like what Grahame was saying, where if I'm in a factory, I'm part of a team, I have to be there to support the rest of the team, and that's a lot more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's also totally a great thing. I think that's also something a lot of people would have been at least touching on in their own experience from working at home. Sorry, I think everyone's had to deal with that a little bit. I might throw to John now. John, are there any things that don't work for you about the current Workday situation? Oh, you're just on mute. Sorry.
Should be off mute. But that 8-hour structure assumes that we're all the same. And we know for a fact that we're different. Now, I get that it got born out of that industrial revolution where you needed people in a factory to produce their widgets to make the profit. And whether it's control or profits, it doesn't matter, but it served a purpose. But we're not all the same. So, Danette's not a morning person. Grahame is a morning person. And he'll stay up late, whereas Danette will be in bed at 6 p.m., given half a chance. So, and for me, I prefer to get in, do my work and get out, still do my 8 hours, but you've got to cater for those individuals. And I don't think that structure does that. Nowadays, working from home, you've got a lot more flexibility around that. And COVID has shown that we can still, in my workplace, you can still create the same output, because 8 hours of work doesn't equal 8 hours of output. So, there's a whole balance there that's got to occur. So I think the structure's wrong. I think management's got to look at their workforce and the individuals within that. What are their needs? And needs change. So as Alan said, he could get up and do the work. If the kids needed him, he was back there with the farm. Likewise, if your kids need you or your family needs you, that's more important than work. Balance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, it doesn't work for life flexibility outside of the workplace, which is totally something that's with that. And now I might throw to Kanika, our youngest member by a month in comparison to me. So Kanika, are there any things that you don't think work about the current structure, either for you or just in general?
I have to be honest, I haven't worked within the current structure. Everywhere that I have worked has prioritized the idea that as long as the work is done by when I say I'm going to do it, or by when it is needed to be done, most people haven't particularly cared where I do it from or when I do it. So I've been very lucky with that. But the short time in which I had an internship where I had to go sit in an office for 8 hours a day, twice a week over 3 months, I quit in my first month of this internship. Because I also realized everyone would come to work and nobody actually works for the whole 8 hours. You're there the first hour, everyone's just getting coffees, talking to everybody. And then you're probably doing a bit of work from like 9:30, 10 to like about noon. And then there's like an onslaught of people taking lunch and drinking more coffee till about like 2. And then the office I was at would have like a fun thing they do where they like do the quiz from the edge from like 2 to 2:30. And then at 4 o'clock, the office starts like thinning out. And that's been most offices I worked at, where nobody's actually there for 8 hours. It's just like productive for 8 hours. It's just kind of a punch-in system. So I've never really thought it was effective. I was just like, why am I here? My work is still being done. I don't need to sit in an office where I don't know anybody.
Actually, that reminds me, Kanika, of something when I was living in Canberra. I was listening to the radio and they were talking about how people pretend they're working. And so they would leave their jacket on the back of their seat, or they'd leave their computer screen on to pretend they were working, and they'd rush around being really busy, but they actually weren't doing anything. So it's actually a really good point.
Yeah, so I think it's just that. And I think what I noticed about the 9-to-5 ritual is that a lot of people going to working from home struggle with the self-discipline because they're not also being like monitored. Because I had a lot of friends who went like, how have you been working from home? How have you managed to just like have a routine or do all your work without like kind of having someone looking over your shoulder? And I was just like, I don't think I've ever been in an office where someone's overlooking my shoulder. Sorry guys, there's a postie at the door. I can see that.
Postie, woohoo!
Sorry.
That's all right. I actually wanted to just quickly touch on, I used to work at a coffee shop just in the foyer of a big telecommunication company in Australia. And so I was there every morning to sort of get the vibe of what was going on there. And it was amazing how many of them would admit to me they don't even really start, they're not even functional till 11, you know, especially because I'm giving them the morning coffee and they're like letting me know this is just to even get me awake for 11 so then I can start being productive. But there's a lot of things like that. And so I might throw this now. I might throw this to Grahame, actually. What are some alternatives you would suggest to the current Workday structure?
So I think the biggest opportunity for employers, and really it's business that's going to drive this. If we wait for government to legislate it, it'll be another 10 years down the track because they've got potentially more important things to worry about at the moment. And ultimately, business sort of drives most of this anyway. Business needs to get its head around how do we track outcomes. So the easy thing to measure, and it's been an easy thing for us to measure, if we think about the systems within organisations and the information we collect about the work that our people do, the easy thing to track has always been attendance. You know, clock on, clock off. If you go back to even in factories and in businesses where they had the old Bundy clock, where you had literally a little punch card and you'd stick that in the machine and it would punch a hole in it to show what time you started work, and you'd punch out in the afternoon. So it's been always easy for us to track attendance, but it's the wrong thing to track, and it's been the wrong thing to track for a long time. Going back to Kanika's point before about people attending a workplace for 8 hours don't necessarily work for 8 hours. By the way, that's not a bad thing. The idea, the notion that if you're there for 8 hours, you should be working for 8 hours, that's ridiculous. We need breaks. But I think the more important thing is businesses need to get their head around what is it we're really trying to track, what matters in terms of what we should be tracking rather than what's easy to track. So if we get focused on what do you need to produce, what outcomes or outputs do you need to produce in your role, and if we've got agreement on what that looks like and when they need to be produced by, then away you go. I don't care when you start, when you stop, how long it takes, as long as we get whatever we need by the agreed date/time, that works better.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
And you've got Europe now looking at 4-day weeks, 4-day work weeks, getting paid for 5 or the equivalent of 5, but cutting back to 4 days because they're recognising people need that, that break.
Absolutely, and I think that's really important, and I think probably end up with the same level of production or very similar, just given how much time is wasted generally with people that feel they have to be there when they could be doing something else. And I think that's also one thing I really like about magical learning and working here is how much you give us an hour a week to just develop ourselves in some other ways, and that's become very fruitful going forward because now I have skills in video that we can use, and even podcasting. I know how to set this up now.
What? Oh hell no, that's got to stop. Whose idea was that? No, that must stop, Jeremy. Must stop.
But yeah, I think that's good because sometimes if something is feeling like it's really dragging for me, I can then dip into that hour and reset myself because it's even energizing to learn that stuff, and then I'm ready to go again. So I think that's really good for me personally.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with Jez because that's been happening with me recently where I was feeling a little bit kind of lost And then I think just I just like kind of dedicated time to learning and practicing what I've been learning and kind of applying it to what we've been doing, what we're trying to achieve with ML. And that's been like really good.
And haven't we seen that sort of practice, Jez, with like the likes of Google? So, Google are demonstrating that we can have those, whether they've got pool tables or air hockey or sleep rooms or whatever it is that they've got in there, but they're not driving people to sit at a desk and just be keyboard monkeys. It is, we're seeing that people work well when it's broken up. They're doing different things. Our good ideas come often when we're not really thinking about them.
Absolutely. I also learned while trying to write my thesis, because I was just like, where do I start? How do I focus? How do I go about this? My supervisor told me that the human brain can only focus intensely for 25 minutes at a time, and then you need to be able to take a break after 25 minutes to then get back into something. And I used an app to kind of help me track my focusing, which would lock my phone for like 30 minutes. So I couldn't be like, oh, I got to check this or this. And I just kind of have to, I try and get rid of all distractions and sit at my computer. And I found that over 3 or 4, 25-minute sort of sections, I got as much work done as I would have in a 6-hour study session, or you know what I mean? There was the quality, and what I needed was actually there, versus me just then dilly-dallying, spending 6 hours in a library going I studied for 6 hours, where really my mind was everywhere else. So I think just finding what works for you is definitely so important.
That's actually reminded me of an article I read ages ago, where they said, if you said to your people, this is what you need to do, and once you've done that, you can go home for the day, we would see a change to that, that focused work versus the work where there's lots of meetings and stuff like that often don't value add, to get people to go, okay, this is what I do, and once I'm done that, I've gone home, I get to go home. And as long as the quality of the output is okay, then that's even better, because then it's not 8 hours plus your commute and stuff like that. It's, I go in, I focus on what's important, and then I move on. I go and actually do the relaxing, which is where my brain does the heavy lifting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these have all been really good points. I just wanted to throw up quickly to Alan. Are there any alternatives that you would suggest at the moment?
Not sure, Jez. The one coming up for me, ironically, was Kitty Flanagan's, where I'm getting my information from. She has a book, I think it's the 488 Rules for Life. And
it's hilarious.
It is, and it's so relevant. She talks about the open plan offices when she worked at the ABC, and a bit like Danette was saying before, she'd come in, hang the code up on the back of the chair, spread some papers, and go home, because she only lived 10 minutes away. And if somebody rang to say, where you are, you should say, I'm out getting coffee. Be there in a jiffy.
Yeah.
I love that book.
Strategy is important.
Well, I think that leads us perfectly into our third question, Alan, which is, what are some easy hacks for people struggling in the current system? I think we've just got a great one there, which is just leave the coat there. But I did want to throw this one around, and I might start with Kanika. What are some easy hacks for people that are struggling in the current system, would you say?
I would say break down your tasks to as small, into really small bites. So like I do this for the newsletter, for example, where I'll break it down to putting it on Keep, and then I'll be and then I have a little box for myself where I'll just be now it's in transition with other people to have a look through, and then I'll be I'll put it on WordPress, and then I'll send it to so I just kind of break it down. I break my tasks down to really small, digestible bits of work. And I always go look at my list, and it seems like I'm going to do a lot, but over 2-3 hours of the day, I've kind of finished the whole process. So that feels really, really good as well. It feels like you're achieving something. So I guess a hack for me would be to do that. And if you're working from home and not at the office at the moment, that's really helpful as well to sort of like give you some discipline to work from home and create a kind of pattern. Whereas for people working in an office, I can't give you any hacks because I've gotten myself out of every situation that involved me sitting behind a desk for 8 hours a day. And everywhere else I've worked, even my bosses have not been 8 hour a day people. I used to do content and website stuff for a real estate company. And my boss, we would all come to work at about 10:30, 11. And then after lunch, we'd be like, should we just go to a cafe and then finish our day there instead of sitting in the office? And we did that like 4 days a week.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely a good thing to have in the office. John, I wanted to throw it to you. Do you have some easy hacks for people struggling in the current system?
Well, I like Kanika's idea of the app. I mean, we're in an app world. There's an app out there for everything. So why not an app where you break down, 25 minutes, set yourself those time limits of 25 minutes, I will do this and I'll focus on that. So, I mean, you've got to be disciplined about it. If you're in an office though, turn off your emails, turn off your Teams, turn off your Skype, whatever it is that you have, because I mean, my thing pings constantly and you're constantly getting emails. So therefore you get interrupted in that. If I set myself 25 minutes, you get interrupted and you look at that and you go, oh yeah, I'll have to action that, or I'll have to ignore that or whatever. And then it takes you time to refocus. So turn those things off. If you're stuck in an office, it's hard to stop someone coming to your desk, but then go find a room, go find somewhere separate. If you've got a laptop or a Surface Pro or whatever, take it and go find somewhere away from everyone that you can do these things. So a couple of simple things.
Yeah, they're all really good. When I used to work at my old job, they had scheduled times to look at emails. It was straight after lunch and straight when you came in, and then other than that,
perfect.
try and keep them away. Alan, I wanted to throw it to you. Any easy hacks you have for working in the current system?
Yeah, one thing that I found works really well working from home, Jez, is to let my family know, now I am going to work. You can't just sort of keep coming and going. And at the same time, then it was about me, after that, half hour, go and check on them to see if there's anything they need and let them know I'm coming back to work. And that works really well for me most of the time.
Well, I think that's the best we're going to get at the moment. So that's good. Most of the time, I think, is a good hit ratio. Grahame, I wanted to throw the same question to you. Any easy hacks for people struggling at the moment?
Yeah, a couple. Thanks, Jess. And I love the other responses. Al's comment reminds me of a situation with somebody appearing in the background when someone was on a video call, but we don't have time to tell the whole story. One of the things I thought of, I was reminded of a minute ago, is there are a lot of people out there who have jobs that are not office jobs, but they're still in a very structured, this is when you start and this is when you finish. If you think about a lot of the customer service, like retail is a good example. But if you work for a business that opens at 9 and closes at 5, because that's when most of their customers are going to be around, then you don't necessarily have the luxury of saying, well, I'm going to start at 4 today and I'm going to knock off by 10 o'clock and that'll be my day done. So I think that the bigger question here is probably two things. Can we start to have conversations with our employers about getting more outcome or output focused rather than time focused? And going back to John Kanika, pretty much everybody said the same thing. Work out how you get more breaks into your day. They don't have to be long breaks. There's I don't know whether it's still around. There was an app back in the 80s, 90s called the Pomodoro Technique. So back in those days, before smartphones, it was literally a program you installed on your computer, and it enabled you to break your work into chunks of like 25 minutes. So you have a 25-minute work where you just work really focused, and you have a 5-minute break, and then 25 on, 5 off. So the idea of how do you get more breaks into your day, and that might be in part just not doing the al desco lunch thing. So if you get 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour for lunch, you actually remove yourself from the workplace and have a proper break. But I think engaging employers in more conversations around, let's get more focused on what I need to deliver rather than what hours I start and finish would help. Great question, Jess.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we've got so many good suggestions. So hopefully this has been really helpful for people. And I'll just throw this now to Danette. For what are your thoughts on people, like some easy hacks for people that are currently struggling in the current system?
So one, absolutely agree with everyone. So our brain does the heavy lifting when we're on breaks. So it's really important to think about how we factor those in. Employers should be thinking about, it's a global world now. How do we, if you've got people who work really well late at night, maybe they can be helped growing, business overseas, not necessarily sort of the domestic market. What everyone brings the most to a workplace is focus. So one of the things I always think about, we've worked in our own business, worked from home for at least 20 years, is also learning to put those boundaries in place, because it's really easy for work to creep into your actual life. And every time it does that, you become less effective. So you think your performance is going like this, but it's actually going like this. So if you're reading something and your brain goes, and you read it again and your brain still, that's your brain going, take a break, listen to it, because you'll come back more effective. One of the things I do is I close my computer down and I'll close the door to my office, and that's the end of the workday. I don't go back near the computer till the next day. So it's really making sure that understanding that work will expand to whatever you let it, putting really good boundaries in place, because those boundaries help you focus more. And that's really what workplaces need. They need people who, when they're there, have that time to focus. And again, I agree, it shouldn't be about the hours, it's about the output. What are people producing? But don't then go, oh, they produced all this amazing stuff, so I'm going to put more work on, because that just burns people out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for answering all these questions. I think it's been really informative. I feel like I've got such a good, well-versed approach, because we've got so many different angles that we've been attacking this from. So it's awesome. I'd just like to ask everyone their final thoughts on this topic. And I might start with you, Danette. What are your final thoughts on this topic?
I can't remember who said this, but basically you're employing really intelligent people. Get out of their way. So let them, they know themselves better, get out of their way. Thanks,
Perfect.
Jess.
That's all right. Short, sharp and sweet. I love it. I might go to John Scollen next. What are your final thoughts on changing the Workday Workweek structure?
I think we've got to start the conversation, and now's an ideal time that we've gone through COVID. Everyone's been in lockdown. People have demonstrated that they can work from home. Are we going to go back to the old practices straight away? Or are people going to have a conversation and actually consider other people's needs? Start the conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I might throw it to you now, Alan. Any final thoughts on this changing the Workday Workweek structure?
Yeah, I guess my key takeaways would be boundaries and self-care. As like Danette says, put that boundary in place. When I'm finished work, it's done. And look after ourselves so we are ready to go the next day, fully focused and our bucket's filled up.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jess.
Awesome. No, thank you. And Kanika, any final thoughts on changing the Workday Workweek structure?
I feel like I have nothing to add that everyone hasn't already said. But yeah, just reiterating boundaries, breaking your tasks into small, digestible pieces of work, and listening to your body and your brain.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's totally what we're going for there. I love it. And Grahame, to close us out with your final words as the CEO here, and the one that can affect the most change. Grahame, what are your final thoughts on change the Workday Workweek structure?
My initial thought was get back to work, all of you. But that was supposed to be inside voice, Grahame. Inside voice. I actually wanted to flip it just to wrap up. Spare a thought for employers, for businesses. Because we have been really focused on employees and how do we help support them to move out of the old structure. For business owners, I think one of the most important questions for you at the moment is, do your systems enable you to accurately track outputs, outcomes, deliverables? And if not, that's where you need to start. Because when business owners have more comfort, more certainty that they're able to actually track deliverables and outputs and everything else, that can help them be a lot more flexible in terms of when you do and don't, whether you have to have structure around the hours you work. If they're not able to track it, or they can't easily track it, they're less likely to be flexible in terms of how they support you in the work you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. This has been a very holistic approach to this question. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So I just wanted to thank you all once again for joining me on this Zoom call and podcast. And for anybody listening at home, you can watch this on YouTube. And for anybody watching it, you can listen to it as a podcast. And I just wanted to say to everybody, have a magical week.
Awesome. Thanks, Jez.
Thanks so much,
everyone.
Jez.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
everyone.